The air in the conference room still smelled faintly of ink and coffee when Eleanor Hayes found herself staring at the cardboard box that now held 3 years of her life. Her fingertips brushed the rim of the mug she used every morning, the one her younger brother had given her as a reminder to stay strong. The sunlight spilling in through the blinds felt cruel, as if the universe itself was mocking her. 10 minutes ago she had been an ambitious marketing executive preparing to finalize a deal that could have elevated her career. Now, she was just another name erased from the company roster. The dismissal had taken less than 15 minutes. The accusations had been absurd, but they had been delivered with the kind of finality that left no room for protest. Someone had leaked client strategies to a competitor, and Eleanor had become the scapegoat. Her supervisor's voice echoed in her head, flat, rehearsed, and conveniently detached from any sense of fairness. "The decision is out of my hands." The words were polite, but they cut deeper than outright cruelty ever could. Office politics had always been sharp, but Eleanor never thought she'd be struck down by them so ruthlessly. She carried the box out, her shoulders stiff, her heart pounding. On her phone, her brother Daniel's name flashed across the screen. She almost let it ring out. Her voice wasn't steady. Her spirit wasn't steady, but she answered anyway. Daniel was only 22. His dreams of becoming a musician as bright as ever, though shadowed by the heart condition that had forced him to put his life on hold. His voice carried that same fragile hope when he asked, "Did you talk to your boss about the advance?" Eleanor's throat tightened. She had promised him she'd cover the surgery, that everything would be okay. She wanted to be the older sister who could shoulder it all. But her words came out cracked around the edges. "We'll figure something out, Danny. Don't you worry." She smiled through the ache in her chest, forcing lightness into her tone. Because he didn't need her fear on top of his own. The city outside felt different that day, colder, louder, and indifferent to her unraveling. Each step she took home felt like a battle against a tide determined to drag her under. The savings she had worked so hard to build would vanish quickly against medical bills. She had planned her path so carefully: overtime hours, flawless presentations, sacrifices that had cost her friendships and weekends. All of it was meant to secure Daniel's future. And now it had all been snatched away in 12 ruthless minutes. 3 days later, desperation carried her into the lobby of Blackwood Enterprises. It wasn't a job she had wanted. Not really. It was a temporary contract arranged through an agency, a coordinator's role for an upcoming corporate event. The pay was far beneath her skills, but it was something to keep the lights on, to pay for Daniel's medication, to give her one more week to figure out how to climb. Back from the edge, the building rose above her like a fortress of glass and steel, each reflective panel throwing her weary face back at her. She tugged at the hem of her plain black jacket, acutely aware that everyone who strode past her seemed to belong here in a way she didn't. Still, she pressed forward. When she gave her name to the receptionist, her voice didn't waver. She would not let the city, or this cruel twist of fate, see her bend. Inside, the 42nd floor hummed with energy. Caterers rushed to arrange sparkling trays of delicacies. Technicians adjusted sound equipment, and assistants darted in and out with clipboards clutched to their chests. Eleanor had been assigned to oversee the beverage stations, and unglamorous detail compared to the dazzling displays of wealth and power unfolding around her. But she approached the task with precision, aligning cups in neat rows, adjusting labels so they faced forward, ensuring every station gleamed with professionalism. Then, the air shifted. A group of executives turned the corner, their polished shoes clicking against the marble, their voices carrying talk of acquisitions and projections. At their center walked a man whose presence seemed to draw every gaze in the room. He was tall, his posture a study in authority, his suit tailored to perfection. His expression was unreadable, carved from discipline and distance, yet it commanded attention without effort. Eleanor had seen his picture before in magazines and news articles. Sebastian Blackwood, brilliant, ruthless, and untouchable. He was the kind of man who built empires from ambition, who could reduce competitors to rubble with a single decision. A genius, they called him. A tyrant, whispered those who worked under him. He carried both reputations as easily as he wore the silver cufflinks at his wrists. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the coffee pot in her hands, determined not to stumble under the weight of his presence. But fate had other plans. Her hand slipped, the pot tilted too sharply, and a dark splash of liquid spread across the pristine tablecloth, then streaked across the cuff of his suit. The room froze. Every conversation fell silent. Every eye turned toward the disaster unfolding in slow motion. Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks as her mind screamed at her to fix it, to say something, to disappear anything but stand frozen in shame. "I'm so sorry," she blurted, fumbling for napkins, ready to blot the damage before it spread. But before she could reach him, Sebastian raised his hand, halting her movement. His gaze settled on her, sharp enough to pin her in place. She braced herself for the explosion, the wrath of a man known for cutting careers short with a single word, but instead, his lips curved, faintly, almost imperceptibly. "It's just coffee," he said, his voice low and steady, calm, where she expected fire, amused, where she expected fury. The men behind him shifted uneasily, exchanging glances as if they too had prepared for the storm that never came. Eleanor swallowed hard, her hands still trembling as she clutched the stack of napkins. His eyes hadn't left hers. It felt as though the entire floor had vanished, leaving only the two of them standing in the wreckage of a spilled cup of coffee. "What's your name?" he asked at last, his tone not demanding, but deliberate. She forced her voice to hold steady, though her heart was a thunderstorm in her chest. "Eleanor Hayes." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with that same quiet intensity, he repeated her name as though testing it against the weight of his memory. And then came the words that would change the direction of her life forever. "Well, Eleanor Hayes, you've just made this morning unforgettable." And in that charged silence, she had no idea whether it was the beginning of her redemption or the start of a chain of events she would never escape. Eleanor had not expected to see him again so soon. After the coffee accident, she had assumed that her role at the event would end quietly. She would fade back into the hum of assistants and servers, slip out when the night was over, and carry her paycheck home like a lifeline. But Sebastian Blackwood had other plans. She noticed it first in the way his eyes followed her when she thought no one was watching. Not intrusive, not unkind, but with a curiosity that unsettled her. For a man who could command boardrooms and bend markets with his decisions, he seemed far too interested in a temporary event worker arranging coffee and polishing glassware. Every time she caught his gaze, a flicker of something stirred respect, amusement, calculation. She couldn't tell, and that uncertainty left her more nervous than his reputation ever could. The event stretched into the evening, and Eleanor's focus never wavered. She moved with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they were voiced, making sure every detail ran seamlessly. It wasn't pride that drove her, it was necessity. Every dollar she earned was another step toward Daniel's surgery, another shield against the fear clawing at her chest. But when the last speech concluded and the applause faded, Sebastian approached her directly. The executives around him drifted away, giving him space without needing to be told. He stopped a few feet from her, his presence filling the room even in silence. "You work harder than half my staff," he said, his voice even but edged with something sharper. "And you don't flinch under pressure. That's rare." Eleanor blinked, unsure how to respond. Praise from a man like him felt like a spotlight she hadn't asked for. "I just do what's expected," she said softly. His lips twitched, as though he almost smiled. "No, you do more than that." He glanced at the checklist in her hand. The ink smudged from where she'd been gripping it too tightly. "Tell me, Eleanor Hayes, are you content with temporary contracts and odd jobs?" Her throat tightened. The answer was no, of course not. But she wasn't in a position to be honest. Not with her career ruined and her brother's health hanging over her like a storm cloud. "It pays the bills," she managed, though the light tasted bitter. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then he said, "Come to my office. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Ask for me directly." The words left her stunned. "I don't understand. Why?" "You will," he replied, already turning away. Sleep evaded her that night. She lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Was this opportunity or another cruel twist of fate? Men like Sebastian Blackwood didn't invite people into their offices without reason, and yet she couldn't ignore the pulse of hope that beat beneath her fear. If he offered her something steady, something real, it could mean security, stability, maybe even enough to save Daniel. The next morning, her nerves buzzed as she entered the towering building once again. This time, she wasn't here as a background worker. She gave her name to the receptionist, and within minutes she was being ushered into a space that seemed worlds apart from the rest of the city. His office was vast, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline. The desk was sleek and uncluttered, a reflection of the man behind it. He didn't rise when she entered. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space as naturally as the morning light. "Sit," he said simply, and she obeyed. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the city below. Then Sebastian leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "I don't waste time with small talk. So let's be clear. I need someone I can rely on, someone who won't crumble when the ground shifts. Last night proved you have that quality." Eleanor swallowed hard. "You're offering me a job, in a sense." His tone sharpened. "But not a simple one. I require more than an assistant, more than a coordinator. I need someone who can adapt, who can think, who can stand their ground even when they're drowning." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. "Why me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he countered, his gaze locked with hers, unflinching. "And I trust my instincts." She hesitated, her heart torn between suspicion and desperation. What exactly would this position involve? His eyes narrowed slightly. "Not in anger, but in calculation. It involves commitment, long hours, absolute discretion, and loyalty above all else. In exchange, you'll have security, resources, protection, things you cannot find in temporary contracts." The word protection caught her breath. He couldn't possibly know about Daniel, about the crushing weight of medical bills and looming surgery, but somehow it felt as though he did. Her silence stretched along, and Sebastian's voice cut through it like a blade. "Eleanor, the world doesn't hand out second chances. It's giving you one now. Take it." Her mind screamed with doubts. Was she signing away her freedom to a man whose power could swallow her whole? Or was this the lifeline she had prayed for? She thought of Daniel, his smile despite the pain, his dreams deferred, his faith in her that she could carry them both. And in that moment, she realized she couldn't walk away, not when this chance could save him. Her voice trembled, but it carried conviction. "I'll do it." Sebastian leaned back, satisfaction flickering across his face. "Good, you start today." As she left his office, her pulse raced with equal parts dread and determination. She didn't know what she had just agreed to, not fully. But she knew this. Her life had just shifted onto a path she could never have imagined. And somewhere deep inside, a whisper of fear told her that this contract wasn't just about business. It was about to pull her into a storm she wasn't prepared for. Yet, even as the uncertainty pressed in, another voice rose stronger than the fear. A voice that reminded her of Daniel, of promises made, of dreams worth fighting for. That voice said she would endure, she would rise, she would not break. But what she could not know, what no amount of courage could have prepared her for, was how much this decision would cost her heart. The first days under Sebastian Blackwood's contract felt like stepping into another world. Eleanor quickly discovered that working for him wasn't about paperwork or errands. It was about walking a tightrope where every step mattered. His schedule was relentless, his standards impossibly high, and his trust something he offered in fragments, as though testing whether she could carry the weight of his world without faltering. Her mornings began before dawn, scanning through files, cross-referencing data, arranging meetings that shifted like pieces on a chessboard. By the time Sebastian entered the office, sharp and controlled in his dark suit, Eleanor had already been running for hours, and yet his gaze would sweep across her desk as though he was silently asking, "Are you ready for more?" What unsettled her wasn't his demands, but his silence. He rarely gave orders outright. Instead, he placed problems in front of her and waited to see if she could solve them. When she did, his expression remained unreadable. When she faltered, he corrected her with precision but never cruelty. It was almost worse because his calm left her unsure whether she was succeeding or failing. One afternoon, less than a week into the job, Sebastian summoned her into the boardroom. A half-dozen executives sat around the table, their eyes sharp, their pens poised. Eleanor hesitated at the door, clutching a folder of documents she had prepared. She had assumed she would simply drop them off and leave. But Sebastian gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Stay," he said simply. Her heart hammered as she sat, every eye shifting to her. The meeting began: numbers, projections, strategies. For international expansion. Eleanor listened carefully, following the rhythm of the conversation, until one executive challenged a figure she had compiled. The room turned to her, and her mouth went dry. Sebastian said nothing. He didn't defend. Her didn't correct the challenge. He only leaned back, watching, waiting. With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the folder and explained the data, her voice soft but steady. She outlined the sources, the calculations, the reasoning behind the projections. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then, one by one, the executives nodded, conceding the point. Sebastian didn't smile, but when she glanced at him, she caught the faintest flicker in his eyes: approval, quiet and deliberate. And in that moment, she realized what he was doing. He wasn't just testing her skills, he was testing her courage. Outside the boardroom, her legs nearly gave out. She leaned against the wall, exhaling a shaky breath. She had faced humiliation, dismissal, injustice, but this was different. This was pressure she had chosen, and against all odds, she had held her ground. That night, exhaustion weighed on her as she returned home. Daniel was waiting, his face pale but his smile bright. "How's the new job?" he asked, strumming absent-mindedly on his guitar. Eleanor forced a smile. "It's intense. Intense is good," he teased. "Means you're alive, alive." That was one word for it. Another was consumed. Yet she didn't tell him about Sebastian, about the way his presence lingered in her mind long after she left the office. She didn't tell him about the silent challenges, the unspoken expectations, the strange balance between respect and fear. She didn't tell him that her heart seemed to race for reasons she didn't fully understand. The weeks blurred together. Eleanor found herself adapting to Sebastian's world, learning his rhythms, anticipating his moves. She began to notice details others overlooked: the way he tapped his pen when he was dissatisfied, the silence he preferred over unnecessary words, the rare moments when his jaw softened and his eyes grew distant, as though remembering something far away. And then came the night that changed everything. It was nearly midnight when Sebastian called her back into the office. Papers were scattered across his desk, his tie loosened, his expression tighter than usual. Without looking up, he handed her a file. "This cannot leave this room," he said, his tone grave. She opened it, scanning the contents: numbers, signatures, confidential agreements, documents that hinted at betrayal within the company. Someone high-ranking had been leaking information, the same crime she had been falsely accused of. Her stomach twisted. "You want me to," she began. "I want you to trace it," he interrupted. His gaze was sharp, unyielding. "Quietly, discreetly. If you succeed, you'll prove your worth beyond question. If you fail," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor's hands trembled as she closed the file. She had asked for a lifeline, and he had given her one, but now she realized the cost. She was no longer just an employee. She was a player in a game where power and survival were the stakes. She nodded, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I'll do it." For the first time, a shadow of a smile touched his lips. "I knew you would." When she left his office, clutching the file against her chest, the city lights outside seemed harsher, sharper. Somewhere in the distance, Daniel was sleeping, trusting her to fight for him. And now, she carried not just his hopes, but the dangerous weight of Sebastian Blackwood's trust. Her life had already changed once with that cardboard box. Now, it was about to change again into something far more dangerous, and far more impossible to walk away from. The file Sebastian placed in Eleanor's hands became the heaviest weight she had ever carried. Each page whispered secrets she wasn't supposed to see, names that carried power, signatures that could end careers. The deeper she read, the more The truth gnawed at her. This wasn't just corporate rivalry. This was betrayal buried inside the walls of Blackwood Enterprises. The same betrayal that had once destroyed her own career. For days she moved in silence, working her normal hours under Sebastian's sharp gaze while slipping away at night to dig through the details. She studied transaction trails, email patterns, and hidden codes woven into reports. The puzzle was intricate, designed to deceive. But Eleanor had learned from her own downfall to look where others never bothered to glance. Every discovery led to another knot, another question. And with every knot untangled, she felt herself stepping deeper into a shadowed world where truth could either free her or finish her. Sebastian didn't ask for progress reports. He didn't hover. He simply watched her with an intensity that said he already knew she wouldn't let go until she uncovered the truth. His trust was unspoken but absolute, and that frightened her more than his authority. One evening, well past sunset, Eleanor sat at her desk with papers spread around her like fragments of a broken mirror. Her eyes burned from fatigue. Her body begged for rest, but something in the numbers kept pulling her forward. A pattern emerged, subtle but undeniable. Someone had been funneling information to a rival firm, not just once, but repeatedly over months. And the signature buried at the bottom of several hidden memos froze the blood in her veins. It was Jana, her old supervisor, the woman who had smiled with pity while telling her she was fired, the woman who had delivered her destruction with hands as clean as polished glass. Jana had been the traitor all along. Eleanor's breath caught, her hands trembling around the evidence. Rage and vindication collided inside her chest, but beneath them was fear. If she exposed Jana, she could clear her own name, reclaim her honor. But she also knew that Jana wasn't acting alone. Someone higher up had allowed this to happen, and exposing her could trigger a storm far larger than Eleanor was ready for. She pressed the papers together and walked into Sebastian's office. He looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable as always, but his eyes sharpened when he saw her face. "You found something," he said, not as a question, but a certainty. "Yes," Eleanor replied, forcing her voice steady. She laid the file in front of him, her finger pointing to the damning signatures. "It was her, my supervisor. She framed me to cover her tracks." Sebastian's jaw tightened, his hand closing over the page. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied her with that piercing gaze. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his voice low. "I suspected as much." Her chest tightened. "You knew." "I had a theory," he admitted, "but I wanted to see if you had the resolve to uncover it yourself. Now I know." The mix of anger and admiration in his tone made her pulse quicken. He wasn't congratulating her, he was measuring her. And she realized, perhaps for the first time, that Sebastian Blackwood's world wasn't built on certainty, but on constant testing. "What happens now?" she asked. He tapped the edge of the folder. "Now we deal with her. But not yet. Timing is everything. If we strike too soon, we expose the company to damage. If we wait, we control the outcome." His eyes locked with hers, sharp as steel. "Can I trust you to stand by me when that moment comes?" The question was heavier than the file itself. It wasn't just about loyalty to him as a boss, it was about stepping into a fight where the rules didn't exist, where betrayal was the currency, and the cost of failure could be devastating. She thought of Daniel, of the surgery looming ahead, of the promise she had made to protect him. She thought of her own pride, shattered once, but now rekindled by the chance to reclaim her dignity. "Yes," she whispered, but the word held more power than a shout. "You can." For the first time, Sebastian allowed a faint smile to break through his mask. It wasn't mocking or arrogant, it was almost human, almost vulnerable. And that small glimpse unsettled her more than his power ever had. In the days that followed, Eleanor carried herself differently. She wasn't just a shadow in the office anymore, she was part of something larger, something dangerous. Whispers spread among staff about how closely she worked with Sebastian, how often she was called into private meetings, how fiercely his gaze followed her when she spoke in boardrooms. Some assumed she had earned his favor in ways they dared not say aloud. Others envied her courage to stand beside him. Eleanor ignored them all, because the truth was far more complicated. Late one night, After another long meeting, she lingered by the massive windows of Sebastian's office. The city glittered below, alive and endless. She felt his presence before he spoke, the quiet intensity that filled every room he entered. "You remind me of someone," he said suddenly, his voice softer than she had ever heard. She turned, startled, who he didn't answer right away. His eyes fixed on the lights below. For a moment, the cold mask slipped, revealing something raw beneath. Someone who refused to break, no matter how much the world tried to bend them. His gaze shifted back to her, sharper now. "That's why I chose you. Not because of your skills. Because of your fire." The words sank deep, leaving her breathless. She wanted to ask who he meant, what story haunted him behind those eyes. But she didn't. Some truths were meant to be earned, not demanded. Instead, she said softly, "And what happens if that fire burns me out?" Sebastian's expression darkened, but his voice was steady. "Then I'll make sure it doesn't." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. And in that moment, Eleanor realized the truth. She was no longer standing on the edge of his world. She was being pulled into its center. What she didn't yet know was that stepping deeper into Sebastian Blackwood's orbit would mean confronting not only the betrayals of her past, but the hidden scars he carried himself. And those scars, once revealed, would test not just her loyalty but her heart. The summons came on a rainy morning, the kind of gray dawn that soaked the city in heaviness. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror, tying her hair back with hands that trembled, not from fear but from anticipation. Sebastian had told her the time had come. They would confront Jana together, the woman who had stolen her career, her reputation, and nearly her hope, was about to face justice. The elevator ride to the upper executive floor stretched like an eternity. Beside her, Sebastian stood tall and composed, his silence sharper than words. He didn't glance at her, but the presence of his hand near hers on the railing was a quiet anchor. She drew strength from it, inhaling slowly to steady herself. This was more than a meeting, it was a reckoning. Jana was waiting in the boardroom, her smile as polished as ever, though her eyes flickered with unease when she saw Eleanor enter behind Sebastian. The room was empty except for the three of them, the air thick with tension. "Mr. Blackwood," Jana began smoothly. "I wasn't expecting." "Sit." Sebastian cut her off. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of finality. Janet's smile faltered as she obeyed, her fingers tightening around the arms of her chair. Eleanor stood quietly at Sebastian's side, her heart pounding as he laid the file on the table. Slowly, deliberately, he opened it, revealing the evidence she had unearthed. Janet's face drained of color as her own signature stared back at her from the page. "Care to explain this?" Sebastian asked. For a moment, Jana said nothing. Then she laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "This is absurd. Anyone could have forged those documents. You don't honestly believe she nodded toward Eleanor with venom, "could have discovered something you and your team overlooked?" Eleanor flinched, but Sebastian didn't waver. His gaze was cold, steady. "You underestimate her. That was your first mistake." Janet's facade cracked, her voice rising. "You can't prove anything, and if you try, I'll make sure the board questions why you trusted an outsider with confidential information. How would that look for your precious empire?" The threat hung in the air. Eleanor's throat tightened, fear and anger warring inside her. For a moment, she wondered if this was the end, if Jana would slip away again, leaving her powerless. Then Sebastian leaned forward, his voice a blade of steel. "You've already lost, Jana. The board doesn't need to hear rumors. They'll see the truth. And when they do, you'll be finished." He closed the file with a decisive snap. "Consider this your only courtesy. Resign quietly, or I'll expose you publicly." The silence that followed was suffocating. Janet's mask crumbled, bitterness twisting her features. She turned her glare on Eleanor, hatred blazing. "You think you've won, don't you? You think crawling under his wing makes you powerful. You're nothing but a pawn, Eleanor. When he's done with you, you'll be discarded like the rest." The words sliced deep, but Eleanor forced herself to meet her gaze. For the first time, she didn't cower. "Maybe I am a pawn," she said softly, "but I won't let people like you decide the end of my story." Sebastian's eyes flicked toward her, something unreadable flashing in their depths. Jana opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. She saw the end in his eyes, in Eleanor's resolve, and finally, she stood, her voice trembling with fury. "This isn't over." With that, she stormed out, the echo of her heels fading into silence. When the door shut, Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. She hadn't realized how hard she was gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles ached. Sebastian remained calm, his expression unreadable. "You handled yourself well," he said. "At last, I felt like I was going to fall apart," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, you stood your ground. That's what matters." For the first time, the ice in his tone melted, replaced by something warmer, something almost protective. Eleanor met his gaze, and in that moment, she saw not the untouchable CEO, but the man beneath, the one who carried his own scars, the one who recognized resilience when he saw it because he had lived it himself. That night, when Eleanor returned home, Daniel was awake, waiting for her with tired eyes. She told him only part of the truth, that she had confronted someone who had wronged her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had won. Daniel smiled weakly, strumming a chord on his guitar. "That's my sister. You don't back down." But as she lay awake later, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Sebastian, about the way he had stood beside her, silent but unwavering, about the way his gaze had lingered after Jeanette's departure, as though he saw more in her than even she saw in herself. Yet she also remembered Jeanette's parting words, sharp and venomous. A pawn, discarded when no longer useful. The doubt crept in like shadows at the edge of light. She had trusted Sebastian, had stepped into his world without hesitation. But was she truly a partner in his battles, or just another piece in a game? Far bigger than she could comprehend. She didn't have the answer. All she knew was that her life was tangled with his now, and every step forward carried her deeper into a future she couldn't predict. And somewhere, hidden behind Sebastian's calm mask, was a truth she hadn't yet uncovered, a truth that, when revealed, would shake everything she believed about him and about herself. The morning of the shareholders' summit arrived with a heaviness that settled over Eleanor. Like a storm cloud, the city skyline gleamed outside her window, but she barely noticed the beauty of dawn breaking over the glass towers. She couldn't shake Jeanette's words, replaying in her mind like a curse upon, discarded when no longer useful. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch with his guitar across his chest, exhaustion etched into his young features. Eleanor lingered beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, silently promising herself that whatever storms lay ahead, she would shield him. He deserved music, laughter, and dreams, not worry. When her phone buzzed, she didn't need to check the caller ID. Sebastian, his voice, deep and even, held none of the tension she carried. "Be ready by 9. I'll send a car." "Sebastian," she said, hesitating, "what happens today?" A pause stretched on the line, then his answer came, measured and deliberate. "The truth happens. And the truth is never simple, Eleanor. But it's necessary." Those words haunted her as the black sedan pulled up in front of her apartment. The ride to Blackwood Tower felt endless, and yet, when she stepped into the grand lobby, it was as though no time had passed. The building hummed with energy. Reporters clustered outside. Investors in sharp suits hurried across marble floors. The air buzzed with expectation. With whispers of change dotting the boardroom, every seat was filled. Power radiated from the men and women who controlled not just fortunes, but futures, at the head of the table. Sebastian stood tall, his expression carved from stone. When Eleanor entered, every eye flicked toward her. She felt like a trespasser in a world that was never meant for her. But Sebastian's steady gaze anchored her. The meeting began with routine matters. Numbers, projections, formalities, but tension built with each passing minute. Eleanor sensed it. This wasn't just about the company's future. It was about Sebastian himself. Finally, a silver-haired board member leaned forward. Her voice sharp. "Mr. Blackwood, there are allegations, documents suggesting questionable practices. You've built an empire. But empires can crumble if trust is lost." Murmurs rippled through the room. Eleanor's heart pounded. She recognized the trap, Jeanette's last strike. Sebastian opened a folder, laying down evidence with the same calm precision he had shown in front of Jana, but this time Eleanor saw something else in him, vulnerability, a flicker of humanity in his usually unreadable face. He turned to her suddenly. "Eleanor." The room stilled. She froze, her name echoing off the polished walls. Sebastian's eyes locked onto hers, unflinching. "Tell them what you discovered." 100 thoughts raced through her mind. She could stay silent, protect herself, let the storm swallow him, or she could speak, knowing the weight of her words might shape everything. She rose slowly, her palms damp. "Jana was behind the leak," she said, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength. "She framed me, and when Sebastian learned the truth, he didn't silence it. He stood by me when no one else would." A hush fell over the room. The board members studied her, weighing her every syllable. Eleanor's throat tightened, but she pushed forward. This company was built on vision, on risk, on resilience. Sebastian isn't perfect, none of us are, but he doesn't abandon those who fight for what's right. I know, because I was nearly destroyed by lies, and he gave me the chance to prove the truth. For a long, unbearable moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. The silver-haired woman leaned back, eyes narrowing not in doubt, but in reluctant respect. Sebastian didn't thank her. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough. Trust, unspoken, but undeniable. The meeting moved on, decisions sealed, Jeanette's shadow finally lifted. Yet when the room emptied, leaving only the two of them, Eleanor felt the real weight pressing in. "You put everything on me," she whispered. "Why?" Sebastian's gaze softened, the mask slipping for the first time. "Because you see me for who I am, not just the CEO, not just the empire. And because I trust you, Eleanor, more than I trust anyone else." Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to run, to escape the pull of his words, but another part, the part that had carried her through dismissal, betrayal, and fear, longed to stay. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "Then don't treat me like a pawn again. If I'm standing beside you, it's because I choose to, not because you allow it." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Sebastian did something she had never expected. He smiled. Not the sharp, confident smirk the world knew, but something genuine, almost fragile. "Fair enough," he said softly. The storm outside had broken by the time they left the tower. Sunlight spilled across the city, washing away the gray. Eleanor walked beside Sebastian, not behind him, not in his shadow, but beside him, her brother waiting at home, her future unwritten, her courage stronger than ever. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. She was no longer a victim of injustice. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had faced the weight of power and stood tall. And whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them not as a pawn, but as her own force. Somewhere deep inside, she understood this was only the beginning.